Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Christian Alpha. My name is Troy. I'm an attorney, author, entrepreneur, and business owner, father, and most importantly, a Christian. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Today, I want to do another book review of the book Columbine by Dave Cullen. As I've said numerous times on this podcast, and will continue to say, I think it's so important for men, and especially Christian men of our era, to read widely, to read deeply, and to read across many genres. So I myself make a habit of that. I think you can never broaden your understanding too wide. So, work to be diligent about consistently reading really quality books and deepening your understanding of the world. So today I want to talk about Columbine. Columbine, as I said, was written by an author named Dave Cullen. It was actually written a number of years ago, closer to the actual date of the tragedy. The book that I am reading is a 25th anniversary reissue of the book with some new additions, but much of the material is the same as that written years ago. So most of you probably are aware of the history of Columbine, basically a school shooting that took place in Littleton, Colorado back in the late 1990s. I tend to read a lot about school shootings. I think they have a lot to teach us about our society, about wickedness in the world, about the state of our youth. I think they're very revealing, and so I study them a lot. I think that youth behavior is generally indicative of the health of a society, at any time in any society. I think the behavior and the mannerisms and the attitudes of your youth really give a good assessment of where your society stands in terms of its strength and its health. But school shootings in particular, and that's mostly an American epidemic, school shootings in particular appear to me to be kind of a canary in the coal mine for the pathologies that our society is suffering from and kind of where our society is headed. So I think it's really important to study them, to understand them, and to find out what they can reveal to us. People often forget there were several school shootings before Columbine. A lot of times we think of Columbine as the first kind of thing, domino that set this whole thing, going to where all the others that followed. But really, there were a couple pretty significant school shootings that took place in the years before Columbine. Paducah, Kentucky was a big one. And then I think there was another one. I don't recall the specifics, but I believe it was in Mississippi. Each one of those included multiple fatalities, youngsters, teenagers. Some of them I think were even preteen in one of the cases. So this was a phenomenon that was starting to kind of crop up in the late 90s, even before Columbine. But Columbine, for a number of reasons, has kind of occupied our collective psyche as the template, the archetype of the school shooting, just because it stood out in so many ways, and it was iconic in all the worst ways. I don't mean that in any positive way, but just the scope of the killings, the meaninglessness of the killings, the senselessness, the depth of the planning of the perpetrators, and the personalities of the perpetrators themselves. I think just kind of captured our collective imagination, and really have held it to this day. I mean, Columbine is still kind of the archetype school shooting, even though we've had many since then, and I believe some that have been more severe than Columbine. But it is a very important event in our recent history and worth studying. I'll talk about what I like about the book. First of all, the book is very detailed, and I appreciate the way the author went into great amounts of detail, talking about the specifics of the shooting, how it was set up, how it was planned. One of the things that I don't really like with some of these authors who write books about these types of tragedies or others is that they'll go light on the details of the actual incident, or they won't talk about the perpetrators in great detail out of quote unquote respect for the victims. And be that as it may, there may be some value in that for some readers or for some writers. I find it unfulfilling. I think if I'm going to read a book about a horrible tragedy, hit me with the details. I think readers need to know the depth of wickedness and depravity that occurs during these things. I think we walk around, we see these things for 30 seconds on the news, and we don't fully grasp what actually goes on, the details of what goes on, and just how horrific these situations are. And you only get that, unfortunately, with quote unquote grisly details. And it's not for voyeurism. It's not for some kind of sick pleasure. You really do need to know that stuff, because you need to know how crazy people are. You need to know how crazy they are. This author does a really good job of that, talking about not only planning, which lasted. These guys planned this thing for almost a year in advance, which is just insane. But the shooting itself, he goes into great detail, shot by shot, minute by minute, as to how this thing unfolded. And again, it gives you a deeper appreciation, and I use that word advisedly, appreciation for just how demented and depraved these guys were in undertaking this act. So I appreciate that about the author. I also like the fact that he fleshes out the personalities of the two perpetrators. Eric Harris, who was the kind of the leader, and Dylan Klebold was kind of the follower guy, kind of the dorkier of the two. He really fleshes them out, and I'll be honest, there's this iconic photo of the two standing in the cafeteria, in the school cafeteria at Columbine, brandishing their firearms, and it's come to become this, photo for the ages, and representative of all school shootings and the worst youth behavior. And that's kind of how we know these guys, is two-dimensional out of a photo. That's certainly how I've known them up until I read this book. And the book does not sympathize with the shooters necessarily. I wouldn't even say at all. I wouldn't even say it comes close to that. But it really fleshes them out in a deep way that I have a better understanding of who they were, which really rounds out my understanding of the subject. So I appreciated that. And again, a lot of writers who write about these touchy subjects simply will not talk about the shooters in great detail, and I think that's to their book's detriment. I appreciate the fact that he also spends a great deal of time on the families of the perpetrators, the victims, the other school staff who played a significant role. Some of them, teachers, coaches, support staff, played an enormous role, both in the events leading up to the shooting and during and after the shooting. Some of these people were just heroes, and they would largely be unsung if it weren't for this book. So that's one of the few inspiring parts of an otherwise very dark book. Also, I appreciate that the author is nuanced and he's objective. He takes sides. He does give his opinion, but it is very it's very restrained. He doesn't go off the deep end, just calling them sadistic killers. He really gives a substantive kind of assessment of the killers, why they did it, their mental health, their backgrounds, things that may have led up to it. And but he is very objective, almost to a fault. So I appreciate that to a degree. Now let's talk about the drawbacks. There's one big drawback with this book and with all other books of its kind. Every book in this genre, with the school shooter genre or similar books, mass shootings, things like that. And that is that these authors, by and large, almost to a person, are unwilling to put on paper the concept of evil. They're just unwilling to talk about it. And they're unwilling to acknowledge it. They typically come from a journalistic or a psychological background, a mental health background. They're usually from one of those two areas, and they always pin this on upbringing, mental health, psychological damage, emotional damage. And listen, of course, that's a part of it. We understand that. Even as Christians, we understand that. But we understand that those are all kind of tips of the iceberg of sin and of evil in the world, and of an evil agent operating in the world. And because they never open up that door, because they refuse to look through that lens, it always leaves their analyses coming up short. They're never comprehensive. You always walk away unfulfilled, because they don't give the full story. But I will tell you that even though this author or authors like him don't necessarily delve into that, you as the reader, you as a Christian reader, can certainly read this book and understand just how active Satan is in the world, how active he is in our society and our nation. And these are very telling stories about the depravity that is pervasive in our nation. This event occurred over 25 years ago. Things have obviously only gotten worse. So this is it's a chilling tale. It is a troubling story. Obviously, it's a sobering tale. And I think sobering is the best word, because it's not, you walk away from this and other stories like it. Our job as Christians is not to be depressed over this, not to be fearful, but we are to be sober, as Paul says, and take this stuff seriously, right? And use it as a barometer of where we are in our society, and use it as an even stronger indication that we are to be even brighter lights in our nation today and in our world. The nation is obviously going very, very dark. Our world is obviously going very, very dark. And this is an opportunity for us, particularly as Christian men, to shine even brighter, because the light shines brighter the darker it gets. So that is what I walk away with from this and books similar to it. It is very sobering. It will leave you, it will leave a dark overcast over your day for sure. But that's a call for us to be light in the world, to try and reach these young men in the future and in our communities, to try and be that salt and light in the earth, as our nation steers towards a much darker place. So definitely worth a read. That is Columbine by Dave Cullen. Give us your feedback. If you read it, shoot us a line. Let us know how you liked it. If this podcast brought any value to your day, value to your life, appreciate you subscribing or supporting us. We will be publishing regular content multiple times per week on family, faith, leadership, financial success, and physical fitness, and other things that all apply to being a strong Christian man. So join us for the next episode, and we look to see you then.